Greetings, this is Jared Love, and I've got this rigging experiment I've been working on that I've got it to a point where I like it. It's not completely done, but I felt like sharing it because I thought it was an interesting concept. But basically what I wanted to do was take the head rotation and disseminate that through the neck without having to have individual neck controls. So there would basically just be like one control that the animator could use with stable rotations, or understandable rotations, I guess is probably more accurate. Because one of the things that happens is due to the slight rotation in the neck joints themselves, like the default rotations, you get some situations where having these guys separated out just means a little bit more work for an animator. I mean, obviously, because there's three controls they're having to deal with. But so, for example, this top head joint feels a little stiff to me as I rotate the head forward and backwards. And you can see that by just looking at the kind of the angle difference between the head and the neck. So if I was animating and putting the head down, I would actually rotate the head joint itself a little further just to kind of help liven it up just a little bit more. And another situation is when you're rotating the head sideways, the head kind of has this tendency to bank upward, or it could bank downward. I mean, it's just going to depend on how your joints are aligned. So say I wanted to do like a 90-degree turn. First of all, you have to put in 30 degrees here because you're splitting that value up between three different controls to get that 90 rotation. And this stick I just kind of shoved in the face to kind of help show the angle of the head and how it's moving. So if I kind of duplicate that and unparent it, and then zero these back out, if you take just that top head joint and rotate it 90 degrees, you can see there's probably about a 15 to 20 degree incline in the head, and again that's coming from that slight bend in the rotation of those neck joints. So unfortunately, you can't just take that head joint itself and rotate it sideways because, if you look at the rest of the rotation of your neck, it just looks hideous. So what you end up wanting to do is, throw in some rotation here and, a little bit here, and then you have to pull this one back. And so it just like a lot of just, I don't know, annoying to me. But so it'd be great if you could just kind of have like a control that you just have the head and you rotate it around and the neck just kind of gets all that rotation. Now, originally the idea was that I would just disseminate the twist in, but after practical application and trying it, I felt like, I need to put the head bending forward and backwards and side to side in as well. So I added these neck twist and neck bend multipliers in here. So I'm just going to kind of reactivate them. And I have them separated out because originally I had just kind of added them to it and kept the same value across the whole thing. But I found out it kind of felt like for, bending the head forward and backwards, I needed a different value than the twisting to get that dissemination through to look right the way I wanted it. So now if we look at just the forward and back, you see how the head just feels a little bit more natural. The head is getting a decent amount of rotation. It's actually getting, in this case, 55% of the rotation. The neck is getting 45% of the rotation. And that is split between these two joints. So they both rotate essentially the same amount as each other. And then the head is getting 55% of the total rotation. So it has a more natural feel, but it feels like the neck is supporting that head's rotation. It's not like it's fighting against it or anything. So that's that. And then, of course, the bending to the side is the same. And I've kept the X and Z rotation together, kind of bundled together, but I don't know. I'm debating whether or not I want to split it out into its own as well. And then the twist is basically the twist axis of the joints. So you see here it retains the kind of flat rotation. So it just, to me, that's going to be a little easier for an animator to go in and just kind of, rotate this head around, and they'll have nice looking deformations throughout the neck as the twisting and bending gets disseminated through. So something else I did was I added this guy, and what it is it's a kind of like a look at control, so similar to what you would do with the eyes, but I've got this head aim. So if I turn this on, and I can, not on Z, but I can move this around, and the head will aim at it, but the twisting and stuff of the neck is still going through that whole thing. And then in the interest of, again, making it easier to use, I put it to where this guy is also the up axis for the aim that's in there, so that you can kind of, just with one control, you can kind of more easily control the direction of the head. So rather than having the head just locked in, this is the up, and you've got your controls here, and then if you want to put any twist or any bending in, you have to go in here and whatever. So I just wanted to kind of simplify that process a little bit. Some other things I put in it, I put in an orient space. This says world space, but it's really just the master control. And then, of course, if you set that to 0, it's chest space. So if you were rotating the body, with the aim on, it doesn't actually matter. So let's turn the aim off. So yeah, so it will kind of retain its orientation, and it's splitting all that rotation and twisting up between the neck joints. Of course, if you put this back to 0, so in chest space, then obviously it just follows along. And this is going to be respecting, whatever orientation you put that control in. So the twisting, or the aiming, one of the things I wanted to do is make sure it was kind of stable. So, obviously if you go this far around, it's going to start doing a twist, pop, but overall, it's feeling pretty nice. Some of the other things that are happening still is these neck controls still do work. It's kind of just added to the twisting, or it's added to the dissemination effect. So I haven't really decided if I want to kind of turn them off or whatever, but or put in some kind of extra control that's just like an offset, to where you could get like a little neck jiggling kind of effect out of it. But for now, the reason I'm kind of leaving it in is you have the option to, with this, you can change, how much the neck is affected by the rotation. So obviously at 0, the neck joints are at their default. At 1, they're taking the full rotation from the bend, and the head is essentially getting nothing. So I found 0.45 feels pretty good. It's a similar kind of situation with the twisting. But yeah, they're still there, and this, it's kind of like just adding a layer on top of the FK, to be honest. But it also allows you to where, if the animator really needs to, they could just turn off all of the twist stuff themselves and do all of that. Because if you had like a very specific rotation where, I don't know, you were rocking the neck backwards and the head forward, to do some kind of like, they're rearing the neck back or whatever, then you can still do it. But I think for, I want to say like 95% of head animation, you're just going to be, doing something like this, or you may just be doing just the head itself, the head control. So I don't know. It feels kind of cool. There's one little limitation I found. Not really with the head aim, but if I've got the orient space in the master space, and say I rotate the torso around, and then to get the neck back, I rotate the head around. As soon as I think it's when I twist. Yeah, it's when I twist the chest like a little too far past that 180 degree mark. It pops the neck around, so it's like you have to twist it around this way again. So but that's kind of a standard sort of thing, I want to say, when you've got orientation spaces and keeping something with the world, or in this case the master control. But so that's something that animators tend to be aware of and kind of work with you. But what's interesting is if I do the same thing and have the head back here, but I have it in head aim, this seems to still be stable. So I guess it's just kind of the way the math all works out. Allowed that to stay stable. So given that, I kind of have a feeling where if an animator had a situation where they having to turn the character around, if they're using the head aim, or if they turn off the the world space orientation and they just kind of animate the head that way, they're going to be able to get by. So they've got some options. So So anyway, that was kind of the premise. Some other things I'm not really sure how I would want to handle is if I wanted to disseminate translation throughout all the controls, or if they're translating the head, if that's going to be enough for them. I didn't put in any kind of IK system into the neck. Personally, I don't really like it for a biped neck, but of course it's going to be up to the animators. But I think this would still work okay if you had some kind of IK control in there as well. But if that was the case, you may not really need this dissemination for the twisting. It would still probably be good for the bending, because to get that kind of natural feel of how the neck is bending, you're not going to get that if you have an IK control, because you would have to rotate it and translate it, and the arc of the bending wouldn't be the same. So unless you take the time to key it, obviously. Okay, so to kind of go over some of the basic ideas of how this is working, I'm not going to do like a full-on demo where I'm showing all the connections and everything like that, but just kind of giving the principle behind it. So the rotation orientation of my joints, I have Y pointing down the skeleton to the next bone, or sorry, to the next joint. So these guys essentially have the world orientation where X is over here, Z is forward, and Y is up. And so the rotation order on these guys is set to YXZ, so that the Y, which is the twisting axis, can be completely isolated from the others. So whatever orientation you're using in your joints, you'd want to make sure that that's the case, so that that twisting axis is the last one, or depending on how you want to read it, the first one, because the rotation order is essentially backwards. It means that the Z rotates first, then the X, and then the Y. And the basic premise for the twisting, in order to keep this stable, where it's actually rotating the direction, the head aiming is actually rotating the direction that you're rotating your control, and has that same orientation, is basically because you want to negate out the twisting from this joint before it gets to this one. So basically you have your head's rotating, it rotates this joint, and then the joint below it rotates back so that this joint doesn't positionally move, and then this one does the same thing for this joint. So that way the head twisting is going to be at that, in this case, 93 degrees. So looking at the hierarchy, there's the ATT is just kind of like a buffer. It's like all translations taken. That's the acronym I guess I came up with for it. So it basically is getting the twisting from the neck system. And then the neck A is the actual control. So it just has a control curve underneath the joint, which allows you to control that. And it is also the bind joint in the neck. So all of these guys, the actual control item is the bind joint. I would separate that stuff out, but like I said, this is just a test. It's a quick little demo thing I've been experimenting with. So, and then after that control is the negation joint. So this is for negating specifically the twist. So you see it has this rotation value, which is essentially the exact opposite of the twist value it's getting from the head neck twisting system. So of course that goes on to the next one as well. And then the head, the connection going in here is from the head aim system. So and the bending negation happens before the actual control. So the reason for that is the twisting and the bending happen in a different way. So let me just put some bend on this. And if we look at the values, so there's 7.64, and then on the neck B, it's 7.64. So the bending is taking the rotation here of X being at 33 degrees, and it's saying, okay, 45% of that I'm going to disseminate between the joints, and it takes that value and applies it to both of them. So the X and the Z take exactly the half of the 45% to split between them. And so what you want to do then, in order for this head control to maintain this 33 degrees, instead of getting a double transformation, is right before it, you actually negate out the rotation that would come from the neck. So in this case, 7.6 plus 7.6 is about 15 something. So it's rotated back up negative 15 degrees. So you're taking, what is the head's rotation? 33, almost 34. And you're subtracting out 45% of that, so that this head control just feels like it's not actually rotating further than it is, technically. It's kind of hard to explain to make it easy to understand, so I hope you're able to follow me with it. So the X and the Z behave that way. The twisting is different in that, if I just put this to 90, because you are negating the twist each time, you have to rotate them the full amount they need to for that particular step. So in this case, the head's rotation, you see, is 90, but the twist negate has negative 58. So that's, you know what, let me use a different value here. So let's just put this to 0.5. So this guy is actually rotating it back 45 degrees because that's half of 90. So whatever twist amount this joint has, it's twisting it back 45 degrees so that the head joint here doesn't actually have any built-in rotation yet. So that's why its value is going to be 90. And neck A is 22.5. So that's half of 45. So that's how the math is working out. You take the head's rotation, and in this case it's 0.5, so half of that is 45, meaning that the neck is rotating 45 degrees and the head is taking up the other 45 degrees. But then for the twisting between these, you have this one will be getting 45 degrees, and this one will be getting half of 45 degrees. So rather than taking that 22 degrees and applying it to both of these, you take half, you split it again for the first joint, and then you take an additive effect for how much rotation the second one needs, and then the last one is going to have your full rotation. So depending on how many joints you put in your neck, your math is going to be a little bit different. You may have like 3 joints in the neck instead of just the 2 like I have, so you would want to split that value between the 3, and so you just have to have that cumulative addition to make sure that the middle joints are rotating the correct amount. So as for the head aim system, what I've got going on with this is there is a node. It's going to be in here, I believe. Yeah, so this guy, if I just throw a little locator on there, as you rotate the head around, this guy aims at it, so that's where you're actually getting the aim. And then I set this guy to be the to use the object rotation up of this to get its rotation. So let's hide this and this so that you can see it a little better. So, you know, as I move it around and rotate it, you see that the up vector is being handled by the upward rotation vector of this control. So whatever the y axis is pointing at, that's the up vector for this. And that's just a standard thing in aim constraints that you can do. So what happens then is it takes that rotation value that this has and it splits up the bend, so the X and the Z, and then the Y, so the twisting. It splits that up into the system and adds it to the result of the head control itself. So that's how it's respecting these values of your multipliers for splitting up the twisting. The drawback with this is that, like you see here, if I give it a little bit more bend, this is that node. It stays in the default location of the head joint, and that's just because, like, if I put it in here to where it would move and keep in line with that, it's going to cause a cycle. So, you know, this guy drives the rotation of these joints to get this guy put here, and then its rotation drives these joints to put it in, so it just creates that cycle. So keeping it separate is to help prevent that cycle. But what ends up happening with that is, if you kind of see how the pointer is going through the center of this control, or the axis center of the control, but when I rotate, you know, it goes out of it, you know. So that's because the rotation for that control, which isn't right on top of the head joint anymore, it has a certain value, and it's not splitting it up in a way that keeps this head aiming over here, because the head is in a different location, if that makes sense. I could fix it by putting another aim constraint on the head joint itself, or, you know, on this guy, the top node for the head, but I figure the real purpose behind the control was an idea that you could move it and then just kind of give it a little bit of rotation to kind of help sell the tilt of the head for whatever the case may be. So it's not like you're going to be doing this all that much with the head, but even then, it's not really that far off. I mean, if your character's back here and you rotate this, it still looks like it's looking at the right spot anyway. It's really just kind of, you know, it's meant to just get that posing a little quicker with less controls. So I haven't decided if I want to put that extra aim constraint in there or not. But anyway, that's pretty much it. It's, yeah, you take that rotation, you split it up between your other joints the way you need it to, and yeah, like I said, I thought it was cool. If you don't, that's okay too. There's all kinds of ways to rig things. So this was just an experiment. I got it to a point where I kind of liked it, so I just felt like sharing. Anyway, I hope you like it, and feel free to leave any questions or comments below, and have a blessed day.